Alrighty, we'll start on the presentation. Hello everyone. No mai haere mai ki te tēnei Zui. Welcome to this Zui called Jacob Tuku Ingoa. My name is Jacob Waitiri, and a big shout out to Māori Language Week here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So if I can encourage everyone to embrace their Indigenous languages wherever you may be from today, that would be fantastic. We have certainly been enjoying doing so here in Aotearoa. And welcome to this ACUHO-I virtual roundtable on global perspectives, brought to you today by the Global Initiatives Network, talking about future plans and contingencies. Just a reminder to check out the many online resources that ACUHO-I have available for our profession and community. There's awesome resources out there, including past webinars going up online. You'll be able to catch this one later if you want to share it with your colleagues because of all the pearls of wisdom you'll be receiving, as well as the online community and the future of housing resources that are there. Another plug for more amazing events that ACUHO-I are bringing to us virtually this year. So we've got our October conference series. Absolutely make the most of that. And then new this year, they've got their team all access passes available as well. So I know that my organisation will be definitely making the most of that, and I hope you all do too. So first, we're just going to go into some quick introductions. So as I said, my name is Jacob Waitiri, and I hail from Aotearoa, New Zealand, here in the Southern Hemisphere for the University of Auckland, and my role is Head of Accommodation Operations. Currently in New Zealand, we're in what we call COVID-19 Alert Level 2.5, which means that we have very limited cases of community transmission. For the last 3 days, we've recorded 0. But we have some extra precautions in place, such as mandatory mask wearing in public transport and gatherings limited to no more than 10. So it's made it very interesting when we are literally in the middle of our second semester for the academic year. So that's a little bit about me, and I will start with Elizabeth, then pass on to Vince, and finish with our presenter, Victoria.
Guten Morgen, everyone. Hello. My name is Elizabeth Cox. I am sitting in Berlin, Germany. I work as the head of residence life, or base life as we call it, for Basecamp Student. We are a private developer and operator. We operate beds in Germany, Poland, and Denmark. So basically, we have 3 different levels of alert. In Denmark, in regards to COVID, the Danish authorities keep changing every day the guidelines. So we went from banning large gatherings in the last 72 hours to additional mask wearing to when restaurants and kind of private party spaces can be closed. In Germany and Poland, we're still at the national level of guidelines, which is social distancing, mask wearing, and making sure that people are taking precautions and washing their hands. And so that's kind of a little bit about us and where we are.
Awesome, Vince.
Hello, everyone, and to those of you on the participants list that I know personally, hello, may not have touched base for a while, and welcome to all of you that I don't. As Jacob mentions on the screen there, I'm the CEO of Deakin Residential Services, which is a subsidiary entity of Deakin University in Australia. So we operate around 3,000 beds of student accommodation exclusively for Deakin University, but as a separate entity with no funding lifeline from the university. So that's the space that I operate in. The 3,000 beds we have are all in one state of Australia, in Victoria, which is the hardest hit state for COVID in Australia. However, they are spread across 3 different cities. Our capital city of our state, being Melbourne, is currently in a stage 4 lockdown still for COVID, having been the worst hit city in Australia with a second wave of COVID-19. So I've got colleagues there that are living outside of Melbourne. Myself, I'm not even allowed to travel to Melbourne to see them. And in our other locations, though, in smaller cities outside the capital, we're in, I guess, what would probably be a stage 2 type lockdown at the moment, where again, we're wearing masks and those sort of things. But as of today, woohoo, my local cafes have reopened, as has the bar at the brewery around the corner from my house. So I'll be heading around there Definitely tomorrow night, if not straight after this this webinar wraps up. But a very interesting situation for us, as Elizabeth was saying, but even just with one institution managing vastly different restriction levels for different cohorts of students and different team members.
Awesome, thank you, Vince. And Victoria.
Good morning, good afternoon to some of you. It's morning for me here. Although it doesn't sound like it, I am British and I'm in London. So I'm the head of residential life at the London School of Economics and Political Science, LSE. And our situation, our COVID situation here is that cases are on the rise. And it's slightly slower in London than it has been in the northern parts of the country, but London is quickly catching up. And we're talking to our local councils about local lockdowns and local restrictions. So right now we're similar to many others in terms of mask requirements on public transportation and in shops. And there are limits on the number of people that can gather, which I'll talk about as we go through. But I think let's get into the first slide if we can, Jacob.
Brilliant. So I'll just remind the audience that, while Victoria is talking, please just ask your questions in the Q&A section to our panel members, and then we'll be able to address those once she's shared some of her context. And we welcome your comments as well. But I'll just start with Victoria's first slide.
Thanks. So just some background on LSE. We have 12,000 students, which in the UK is a fairly small-sized institution. And we're slightly different in that we have more postgraduate students. So typically 1 or 2 year master students is our biggest cohort. So we have 5,000 undergraduate students, 7,000 postgraduate students. And of those 12,000, 8,000 of them come from different countries outside of the UK. So very diverse, very international, which in most of the time is amazing and still will be terrific, but definitely brings with it some challenges in terms of how we get students here, how we teach them synchronously if they're not here, and what that looks like. In terms of halls, we have so I work with 11 halls. 7 of them are LSE owned and operated, and that's about 2,300 beds. And then we have agreements with 3 partner institutions for 4 halls, and that's another 1,400 beds. Oh, and I've not finished my slide. Sorry. And then we have an agreement with University of London. So LSE is part of a network of universities in London, and we have I think it's 800 spaces, but I wasn't sure, so I didn't put that in, at University of London halls. We operate a wardenial system within LSE, which means that each of my halls has a warden who is a full-time member of either academic faculty or professional services staff at the LSE, and they do their normal day job 9 to 5, and then they live and work in the hall in the evenings and over weekends. So it's a slightly different system in that typically when I'm at work, they're doing a different job, and then when they're at work, I'm on call. So that's how that works. Looking at the next slide and thinking about our what the pandemic has been like for us, and then I'll talk more about what we think this next year is going to look like. So I had my first meeting, kind of senior level meeting about coronavirus on the 12th of January. And I looked at my calendar a while ago because I was curious. I haven't gone more than 3 calendar days without a coronavirus meeting since that point, and normally I'm in multiple per day. So it's taken over my life. On the 23rd of March, we went into a lockdown in the UK. And at that point, I moved into a student residence hall. And so I spent all of lockdown in halls. Most of the senior managers within residential services live outside of London or on the edges of London. And we wanted to make sure that we had management who could get into a hall really quickly, since people weren't using public transportation, weren't supposed to use public transportation, and none of us have cars. So that was interesting for me, and a good experience and a good opportunity to get to know our staff in some of the halls that I didn't know as well, and to show FaceTime and to support them as they did their work. We never closed our halls, so we released students from their contracts, but we didn't close our halls because we have lots of international students, and we have students who are care leavers, students who were in the foster system, or students who are estranged from their family and don't have other homes. So we let students who wanted to leave get out of their contract as long as they left by the 4th of April, which was complicated by the lockdown situation, but we helped students through that. These are some, I guess, milestones that we've dealt with over the summer. So in terms of the way that the British system works in terms of access to higher education, students take A-level results in their last 2 years. They study for them the last 2 years of high school, and they take these A-level tests typically in April, May, June, and then they get the results on a Thursday in August. So this year that was the 13th of August, and that's when they find out which university they got into. So it's quite late in the academic year. It's about a month before they then move into universities. All of the A-levels were canceled this year, and the government developed a system where they would predict, schools would predict grades, and then they developed an algorithm to kind of moderate those predictions, and it didn't work well. You might have seen it in the news. Some of you might have experienced it personally if you're working at other institutions in the UK, but it was a mess, to put it politely. And what added to that mess is that the government then backtracked on it. So the way that the algorithm worked is that it looked at past performance of schools, and that was particularly disadvantageous to people from backgrounds who are not basically white upper class backgrounds. Minority students were particularly hard hit. Students from areas of multiple economic deprivation were really hard hit, and their results were downgraded from what their teachers had predicted, whereas students who had gone to really excellent schools where they paid lots of money to go there typically had their results either exactly as their teachers predicted or upgraded. The government then did a 180 and said, actually, we'll go off of what results the teachers predicted. And for us, that meant that we got an additional 300 students that we now were contractually obligated to give offers to, that we didn't necessarily have space for. And particularly as we're trying to plan for social distancing and the number of people we can fit into classrooms, we've now rented out ballroom space in local London hotels for the year, which is not cheap, so that we can have the number of classes that we need to have. So it's been, on top of everything else, kind of quite chaotic in the last month, figuring out where we're going to be at. We're currently at 89% occupancy. We did not reduce our bed capacity at all. Our first halls opened on the 23rd of August. On the 1st of September, all of our halls opened for early arrivals, and our contract start date is this Sunday. So the UK has a requirement that if you come in from certain countries, most countries, you need to self-isolate for a 2-week period prior to or upon arrival. And so we've been accommodating students from the 1st of September who need to self-isolate. Okay, Jacob, could you go to the next slide? In terms of thinking about what's coming up, our move-in process looks really different. So normally it is, as I would imagine is for many of you, one big weekend. And this year we've done that quite lean, and people can move in from the 1st of September onwards. We also have many students who are coming later because they're having visa issues or can't get flights. For the UK management of coronavirus, the formation of households is really important, and that determines for us who needs to self-isolate if somebody is symptomatic, and also what groups of people can get together. So for us, that is looking at people who share kitchens, and in our postgraduate halls and our non-catered halls, we have small flats. I think the average size is 10 students per flat. And so it's relatively self-contained. We have 4 catered halls at LSE, And because of that, they have kitchen points throughout the building, but the average student household in our catered halls is 23 students. And in one of the halls, it's 30 per household. So that means that if one of those 30 students gets symptoms of coronavirus, the other 29 need to stay in their room for up to 2 weeks, depending on how quickly we can get a person tested and what that test result is. We had been planning a kind of blended model of teaching and a blended model of activities for this year, so some in person and some online activities. And then on Monday of this week, we changed our laws, and it is now illegal to get together in groups of more than 6 unless they're from the same household. So the thank you, Boris, is to our lovely Prime Minister, who's put this in right as we're getting ready to plan some in-person socially distanced events that are now illegal. And so trying to think about how we manage that. Teaching activity is excluded from that, so that there's an exception for teaching activity, but not for anything else. So our community building, it will be largely household focused. So our households can get together. We're working with the Met Police on a piece of paper that a student can carry with them to say, actually, these 21 other people are all in my household. Please don't arrest us. So we're preparing those to give to students because they are allowed in households to go outside and meet in groups and things like that. And then in terms of contingency planning and what we're doing specifically around coronavirus, I sit on the Return to Campus group, which is a planning group with representation across the school. So within academic departments, with our trade union representatives, and then with staff from various different professional services. And then the scenario planning group, which sits above that, the Return to Campus group feeds into that group. And then I'm working on a couple of different projects. So we have LSE Trace, which is our own internal track and trace system, where we're going to monitor potential cases and figure out who needs to self-isolate and make sure that they know to do that, and that we can be slightly ahead of the system. The current medical system in the UK doesn't kick in until a confirmed coronavirus case, whereas our system will kick in from symptoms. We're also going to start our own testing system. If you've read news about England, I don't know how far outside of this that makes it. We're having a huge pressure on testing availability, and people are waiting days to get tested and then waiting up to a week to get their results. So we had a student who had a fever on Sunday and couldn't get a test until Tuesday. So all of her household are self-isolating while we now wait for those results. So we're hoping to get some more testing capacity internally. And then we're also rolling out a flu vaccine program where we will be offering and really strongly encouraging all staff and all students to get the flu vaccine. I think that might be it. Oh, no. So in terms of thinking about what's coming up, I think the UK system or the UK coronavirus case is escalating quite rapidly right now. So there were 3,000 new cases yesterday, and 2 weeks ago that was hovering just below 1,000. So it's definitely increasing, and they're doing local lockdowns, and other parts of the country have experienced additional lockdown restrictions, and I've been talking to local councils. So of our 11 halls, we sit in 6 different boroughs of London, which means that I'm working with public health teams in 6 different public health teams, and they've got different views on when they might start imposing different restrictions, which will be so fun to manage. Similar to Vincent, we are self-funded, so the concern for us is that last year when we released students from contract, we obviously didn't then collect rent from those students. We also typically run our halls as bed and breakfast, and we do a really robust summer school business over the summer. And we use that to subsidize our student rents. So our student rents are about 20% cheaper than London market rate, but that comes from us running our halls as commercial services any chance we get. We didn't do that. I think we lost about £5 million for just the 3 weeks of summer school that we had, or the 9 weeks of summer school, 3 sessions. So for us, if we don't keep halls open this year, there's going to be financial implications for staff within our division and for the university, because some of the money that we make goes back into the university. And then to top that off, Brexit is still around the corner, and will add lots of uncertainty and change in the coming months. But on the positive side, we started doing some new opportunities that I think will run in over the long term and we'll keep doing. So we did Zoom Q&A sessions once students had their offers, so after A-level results day, and that was terrific. We had the front of house manager of the hall, so the facilities manager, the warden of each hall, a student representative, and myself, and we talked about what life is like in the halls, answered lots of questions. There were many coronavirus questions, but also questions that we think will come up every year. We've had really good engagement with that. And then following that, much higher engagement with our online induction program. So that's been really good. I've been running online RA training this week and last week. And although I'm definitely a bit Zoom fatigued, it's been interesting to see how that changes the engagement and the question answering and breakout rooms, but also being able to record those sessions. And we have one RA who is on a pre-sessional course, so has already started their academics and can't make the training, but in a really helpful thing, we can record all these Zoom sessions and pass them on, and that person can still access training that we would have struggled to deliver in person outside of that. And then we've, similar to many of you, and I've been picking up examples, and we've been copying what other schools have been doing, but some really great virtual events and really nice opportunities to bring students in across our halls. So they're all spread out across London, and there's not normally a lot of interaction, and we're doing some really good cross-hall events. Reduce the Juice is our sustainability program that the University of London runs, and it's terrific. And they've moved that online in a really interesting way with webinars and trainings and data around the energy sprints that they're running. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what that looks like. And then a stronger focus on household events and how we can do things. So next week, one of the halls is doing kind of a meal prep thing, and we've got food that students can pick up in kits from reception and take it up and then all cook and prepare in their kitchens at the same time while someone is leading them online. And another one of my wardens is also a trained sommelier, and she's running a wine tasting event online. And again, they're picking up the wine from reception and going back up to their halls, and she's going to run through that. So I think we've seen some really interesting events that I'm hoping we can keep if we at any point get out of having to do all virtual events. I think I'm going to leave it there and see what questions are out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victoria, for sharing what your plans have been. It sounds like you guys have been putting in an awful amount of work. And even though you've mentioned being Zoom fatigued, I think you've done a brilliant job of just sharing a lot of information in that short amount of time. So I think before we start going into some of these questions, I might go to my dear colleagues here, Elizabeth and then Vince, to sort of go, Elizabeth, you know, Victoria's just focused a little bit on the timeline for acceptances into higher education institutions. Is it similar in Europe? And then Vince, my country cousin across the ditch, in Australia, New Zealand, and the Southern Hemisphere, we're in the complete opposite side of the academic calendar, where we're in the middle of our second trimesters or semesters. So yeah, I'll go to Elizabeth first and then Vince to talk a little bit about the stage that we're in the Southern Hemisphere.
Well, great. Well, thank you. And wonderful presentation, Victoria. I learned a lot, so thank you for the great information. One of the things that we actually have the benefit of is our countries where we operate are staggered. So we have countries that have started their semester in August, and then in September, and then also in Germany, we started in October. So we've actually been quite lucky because it's been spread out a little bit, but also I think as I was talking to some colleagues in the US, right, it also means that our move-in process is now 3 months long, right? So because we have international students who can't get there on the days that they normally would, it means that we have to account for staffing fatigue for move-in, and also welcome fatigue. And how do we welcome students to make sure that they get the information that they need? One of the most interesting things that we've had is trying to open 2 new communities in the midst of the pandemic, and so we're opening We've just opened a new community in Lyngby, which is outside of Copenhagen. And so we've had international students come in. And so making sure that they feel welcome, but also that we are showing and presenting to students that this is a brand new property. But it's also COVID is low risk, does not mean no risk. So making sure that parents and students know that we are still taking care of them, even in the midst of the pandemic as well. So we've been really lucky. I think one of the things that we've been trying to do is make sure that we still create a welcoming atmosphere while limiting personal interaction, which is a lot of what we get our energy from in our business. And so I think that's been really interesting to remind our residents and our staff to wear masks, right? To kind of keep apart, to not handshake when they try to welcome people. And so to keep that up over the next couple of months with different move-ins across the different countries, I think has been an opportunity, but also a little bit of a challenge.
Awesome, thank you. Vince.
Thanks, Jacob, and I add my thanks to Victoria. A great presentation. Enjoyed listening to what's happening in the UK. Down under, as they say, we've got, I guess, probably an interesting spot at the moment in that we're all trying to plan and write budgets for 2021. I've got a board meeting to present my 21 budget at next week, and I've just been writing it this afternoon, and it's a really interesting space. We've sort of accepted that 2020 is a write-off, I think. We're in the second half of our academic year, as Jacob mentioned, with only realistically a couple of months to run. And so the very low occupancies we find ourselves in at the moment, certainly in most institutions in Australia, mine included, are where we'll sit for the remainder of this year. To put that in broad perspective, the business that I'm the CEO of should have had an operating profit of somewhere in the order of 18 million for the year. It will be under 2, and we won't cover our interest debt repayments for the year. So it's been a devastating year financially in 2020. We sent all of our students home back in March. In the midst of Australia's first lockdown, we kept all those that had nowhere else to go. We kept. So again, we had international students, we had students that didn't have safe homes to return to, etc. We never closed, but we sent the vast majority of our students back to their family homes for that period of time. And then we're in the midst of welcoming them back for the second half of the year, or some of them anyway, when in our state of Australia, at least, our second wave of COVID hit. And so our return to some kind of normality for the second half of the year didn't eventuate. So been a very challenging and frustrating and frankly heartbreaking year. But we look forward and I guess plan to hoping that we're operating in some kind of COVID normal by February, March next year. So we've got that time up our sleeves. And one interesting thing, and I think New Zealand has certainly taken an even more cautious approach to COVID than Australia. But when comparing New Zealand and Australia to much of the rest of the world, our risk appetite is just nil. And the city of Melbourne that I operate in hit a peak of 700 cases in our second wave a day, which threw the whole city of 5 million people back into a stage 4 lockdown, which is still not over, and with the goal just being to wipe this thing out. So we had 34 cases Australia-wide today, and we've still got 5 million people in a stage 4 lockdown. So it's an extraordinary different approach to risk. And as Jacob mentioned, in New Zealand as well, they're in a 2.5 or something lockdown, they're calling it in New Zealand. And the numbers of cases are just minuscule compared to what we hear about other countries running thousands of cases a day, but not being in the same kind of lockdowns that we're in. So the governmental and societal approaches to risk have been very interesting to watch around the world as well. And certainly in Australia and New Zealand, it's a very conservative approach to the health and safety aspect around COVID. Hopefully, that means that we can almost have a normal year when we start our new academic year in 2021. What it looks like in terms of how long our collective borders will be closed for, I've got no idea, because what it makes it very difficult to do is to then say, okay, we'll open the borders and have international students come in. Certainly it won't be happening at the start of the year for Australia, except for potentially a small pipeline that can be opened with a government-controlled quarantine. There'll be no self-isolation. It will be you check into a hotel that is manned by Defence Force personnel and you quarantine for 2 weeks before coming out into the community. So quite a different, I guess, environment in terms of the level of enforcement we have here.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Vince. And yes, you know, you're absolutely right. Australia and New Zealand have zero appetite for risk. For us, it was 4 confirmed cases of COVID-19 that threw our country back into a stage 3 lockdown, which is everything is closed except for takeaway meals and essential service workers. That did grow quickly to about, probably at its peak, over 100 cases, but we've had 0 for the last 3 days, I think, in the community, and we're still extending out our current restrictions. So as our government reminds us, the strongest economic approach for us is a strong health response. But it's taken a very sharp hit with today the news that New Zealand is officially in a recession, the first major fall in GDP since 1987. So it's meant that for our institution or our organisation, our university, that our contingency plans and our communication now is all geared towards what the impacts are going to be in 2021 and the tail impacts of that. And we've got a brilliant question on communication while managing crises from Lee. So I think we'll go to Victoria and then we'll go back around to Elizabeth and Vince and sort of talk about how did you manage communications and during the sort of the peaks of your COVID-19, or for our Northern Hemisphere friends, how did you communicate to students potentially arriving, and then talking about any strategies you've picked up? Because I think communication is one of those key things where you can either do too much or too little. You're never going to please anyone, but it's ever so important.
Yeah, it definitely is really a critical part of a good response plan. And I don't know that we've got it. Well, we definitely haven't got it perfect, but I think we've done a good job. There's always room for improvement. One of the things that we've done, which I think basically every university has done, was set up dedicated web page for coronavirus information. So initially that got set up and was updated at least once a day, including weekends. So I was talking to comm staff on Saturdays and Sundays and checking that. And giving information in that sense. We now have from that one page a dedicated staff page, some of which is public information and some of which is restricted to LSE staff, and then a dedicated student page. And within that, we've got a subpage for accommodation and a subpage for current students and a subpage for prospective students, because those messages, as you said, Jacob, are slightly different in terms of what information people need to know or want to know. And I think making sure that we're pretty responsive on those so people can say what they think is missing from pages. And we get a few in a week and we look at those and think about what information we might need to add. The Zoom Q&As that we did were actually really helpful in terms of passing those questions off to our comms team and saying, we think these answers are online, but also we're still getting these questions. So how can we better design our pages or promote them in slightly different ways? We did a welcome microsite for LSE this year, and that had some quick checklists and things that we wanted students to do before they moved in or bring with them when they came, thermometers for everybody. And that was really helpful in getting information and things across there. And then in terms of communication to our staff, during the lockdown and for a few weeks after, we were having twice weekly emails, once from the director of LSE and once from our chief operating officer. and that's gone down to once a week now. But we also do town halls, which I think are really helpful for all of our staff to get to hear and participate and ask questions. And so the school does school-wide ones, and then we do divisional ones because, again, similar to many of you, our staff didn't stop working. And in fact, many of our staff, and most of them are our lower paid staff, are coming in to work, and they are traveling into work or cycling in, walking in, however that might be, but they are in halls. They were frontline staff. They didn't close. They're not working from home. We did furlough some staff. So there's a government scheme in the UK, and we did furlough some of our staff. And as we, although we didn't ever fully close, we did consolidate students into a few buildings. So we were down to 3 buildings for most of the summer. So we furloughed staff in other buildings, but everyone is back now. And I think it's about making sure, how do we stay connected and talk to staff? So with my staff that were furloughed, it was about doing a weekly chat that was just, hey, I'm going to give you information about what's happening at the school so that when you do come back, you don't feel like you've lost 4 months of knowledge, but also how do you toe that line between making sure that we're not, asking them questions, where did you leave this one thing? Or can you remind me where that is? Because that would have been illegal, but also making it optional for them and making sure that we're communicating. I think, honestly, I've developed a much bigger knowledge of Microsoft Teams than I had before we started the lockdown. So it's something that we had used at LSE, and but I've definitely increase my knowledge on that. And I think that that's quite helpful for the informal Teams chats and conversations and managing tasks and to-dos. And there's probably lots more that I don't even know that I can do. But that's some of what we're doing.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we're all loving our Microsoft Teams and other digital connection tools a lot more than we did a few months ago. Elizabeth, do you want to talk a little bit about how you're going with communications in your organisation and context? I'm thinking you're still with us. No, what we'll do is we'll just go straight to Vince. Vince, you're a CEO of a subsidiary. So you're balancing sort of semi-private organisation and university comms. How's that going?
I tell you what, it was interesting in the early days. I was fortunate, though, as the CEO of the subsidiary, I was invited in from day one to sit on Deakin University's critical incident management team. And so I actually was around the table as the university was managing our response to the crisis on a holistic level. Which was invaluable, really. And I ended up basically sitting in that bunker. And then back in the days when we were actually still in person, before it really hit in Australia, I was bunkered down with the critical incident team of the university, and basically managing my own team went immediately to remotely. I didn't see it from the moment. Basically, I got bunkered down with the incident team. Haven't seen my own team since. So that was back in January of this year. But that integration with that team was crucially important. There was obviously a desire to coordinate comms right across the university, ensuring that we're getting messaging accurate. And so one of the sub-teams of that critical incident management team is a communications team. And basically, for a period of time there, we were running everything past those individuals to ensure that anything we were even sending out to our residential students was aligned with the university messaging. One of the most important things about that was the speed at which it was able to occur, and forming the critical incident management team at our university basically suspends all other lines of authority within the university. And that was crucially important, because under any normal world in the university, if you had to run your comms past someone for approval before you could send them out, you'd be waiting days, possibly weeks. So in that context, we were able to draft things, get them approved, get them out within a very short period of time. And then moving from there, I guess, one of the most important things as well was even coming out of crisis mode and into some kind of new normal mode, we had to completely change how we do everything. And one of the key things for us has been, how has the connection of our leadership team worked, spread across 3 cities, Some of us working from home, some of us still going into the office each day, and a real mix. And so one of the things that we've just naturally adapted to is we meet twice a week for an hour, whereas we used to get together once a month for a day. And so as a leadership team, we've had to be meeting and collaborating in an entirely different mode and at an entirely different speed to what we would normally do, which has enabled us again to ensure we're aligning our comms, aligning our messaging to students as we go through. Certainly one of the things for me and the experience of being a CEO through this is I haven't been involved with this level of detail of running our organisation for years. And I must admit, I've actually kind of enjoyed parts of it. But, you know, down to the point where, you know, even last week, we've had restrictions changing this week for our locations here. And the comms are still coming to me as the CEO to approve what's going out to students addressing those topics. Obviously, there's other random communications that go to students without me seeing them, but on those, things are changing with COVID and how we communicate our messaging around that. You know, we've still got that coming to me as the CEO to sign off on before they go out, etc. So, and still aligning with the I think, as Victoria may have mentioned, a return to campus committee. We've got a campus reactivation group, which is what our critical incident team has sort of morphed into as we've stopped trying to manage it quite as a crisis, but we've basically kept that team together and become a campus reactivation group. And so there's not the same sort of strict controls with that group that we had early days, but still points of collaboration in with the wider university.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Vince. And I think, you know, we've all agreed and touched on that. Being very responsive and as accurate as we can in these uncertain times is really hard. You know, it's sort of a paradox you're in as a leader, you know. Be absolutely accurate, but then also we don't know where we're going, which actually leads us on to a next question from Bess in South Africa. Thank you, Bess, for this, which is sort of given the financial devastation that COVID has caused, you know, what are people's plans for if there is a second wave of the pandemic? So given that Vince and I've sort of just mentioned that we've sort of gone through the worst and then out and then back into the worst, I might pass over to Elizabeth, maybe for you to talk about, you know, what are your plans now that you're starting your academic year, and then go to Victoria.
Absolutely, thank you. Sorry for the slight departure there. So what we're thinking about is really kind of reviewing what we did during the first lockdown and making sure that we remember all of the things that we did. I think all of us worked so quickly that sometimes we forget all of the actions that we took. And, you know, Victoria mentioned kind of making sure that you know where information is saved. And so making sure that we're organized in our policies and procedures and reviewing things with staff and thinking about what worked, what didn't work. And what we would change. I think another piece is really looking at our contracts. We will remain open as long as we can, and we want students to come live with us, even if it's online or hybrid. But we also know that, particularly because we work in 3 different countries, that the country guidelines are all changing. So for example, in Poland, they've stopped allowing direct flights from Spain. And so for us, it's making sure that if we have Spanish students who still want to come, how do we help them find a way in, or how do we help them maybe delay their arrival, and looking at their contract terms and working with them to make sure that if they want to come live with us, that they're welcome to do so, and also working with them on an individual basis for if they need to make changes in their contract. And then finally, I think one of the big things that we really are trying to do is more scenario planning, I think, which is what Victoria talked about. We did that actually with just events, and we found that to be really helpful because 3 days after we did our scenario planning with events, we had one of those scenarios come true again. So it does work. And finally, I think just doing a tabletop exercise, it's also, it's weird to continue to prepare while still in the middle of it, but doing a tabletop exercise with people from all levels of the organization and all different perspectives to say, okay, if this thing happens, what is each of our roles? Because I think we can get lost in our roles sometime, and in times like these, collaboration and communication is so important. So to be able to either virtually sit with each other and talk about the situation from each person's perspective is really helpful. And we're being really conservative in our financial planning, I think, which is everyone is saying. So thinking about what are our mission critical costs that we must plan for, and what are some things that maybe are nice things, but maybe we don't have this the next quarter. So those are some things that we're looking at.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Victoria. What are your plans if you have if your wave increases in the next wee while?
Yeah, which it looks like it will, unfortunately. So I think it's, as the Return to Campus group is looking at how we bring people back and also how we potentially send them back home again. All universities have been asked to, on Monday, they were asked to create a second lockdown plan and submit that to the university's ministers. That was a government request that came in on Monday and was due yesterday. So it was really helpful and really fun for us to stop everything else and write one of those in 48 hours. But we did. And it's, again, I think similar things to what you guys have been talking about. So thinking about how we get people home, how we keep places open for those that need it. I think, again, Elizabeth has some really good points thinking about those best practices and what worked really well. In terms of when we did it before and where we stopped halls, we didn't necessarily take the strategic decision. It was about, well, this hall has the most students, so let's move everyone else over to there, which makes sense because it's less disruptive, but wasn't necessarily the best hall for social distancing or for being able to get food to students or various things like that. So I think we now have some lead time to be able to really make those decisions now, so that if we do end up needing that, we can make decisions not off the top of our head. And for us, it's talking to our staff about being agile. And that's the big buzzword that we're using within the department. How are you agile? What does that look like? And the expectation that everybody is going to be doing other duties as assigned. And that is the base of it. And we've had one of the things that's challenging for us is that because our students can self-isolate with us, how do we get them food? And how did they get food? How do we help them do that while keeping within the restrictions of lockdown? And that's been honestly one of the bigger challenges for us, is just the logistics of 600 students in a hall trying to self-isolate and ordering breakfast, lunch, and dinner on Deliveroo, even though they are allowed to use their kitchens. We would encourage them to use their kitchens. I'm shocked by the number of students that Deliveroo breakfast. I honestly didn't know that was a thing, and might need to start looking at what I do on my Saturday mornings. But there's lots of deliveries coming in, and we're asking students not to come down to reception, but that's putting a huge burden on our reception teams. And so I'm asking my subwarden and warden teams to help out with that, and that isn't something that they typically do. And there's been a little bit of pushback in that, but again, talking about we all need to come together, and we're all doing things that aren't necessarily within within the specified job role, but that are about making sure that our students can eat and are well and are following government restrictions so that they're not passing that on to other people. So I think for us, those are the big parts of that, and then similar, cutting down on non-essential spend. So trying to think about what we do need to spend money on and how we do that wisely. And making cases for where we need to do that. We have a hiring, not freeze, but not open hiring. So any post needs to go through the chief operating officer. And it's good because it is, I think, making some people pause and say, actually, do we need to fill this role in that way? Can we pull people from what we are doing more of is looking at how we redeploy or move staff from other areas of the university that maybe maybe aren't able to work from home, and how we help them find other jobs that they can do within the university, which is good for them and good for us.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that. And I'm so thrilled that even across the opposite ends of the earth, our students have some similarities, because the amount of Uber Eats for us coming through our buildings was phenomenal. Even though the first 2 jobs that I had to do as head of operations was ensure the Wi-Fi would remain and ensure our supply lines for our 1,500 students that we cater for on campus. So I'm so glad that it's not just me sort of going, I've just literally got you continental breakfast in safe little individually eco-packed boxes. Why are you ordering McDonald's breakfast? So yeah. Vince, did you have anything you wanted to quickly add to that before we move on to another great question that's come through?
Yeah, sure. I guess in terms of planning for a second or third or fourth wave of COVID, there's a few things we've learned. One is that we won't now send all our students home again. We stand by it being the right thing to do in the first wave, because we were not prepared to run a COVID safe residence at that time. We now are. We have our COVID safe management plan. We've also won the argument with the state government here with regards to student accommodation being an essential service that forms the primary residence of those who live in it. So we've got no external threat of being closed down anymore either. And so we definitely have a view that even if the university gets shut down again and goes back to online teaching, we won't force students to leave their residence. We would, of course, though, be placed in a situation where we may have to let them go again. And certainly it plays on our mind, what if we don't get a normal start to the year next year, which means February for us. And our view being that if we don't get a normal start, it'll be another write-off of a year for 2021. And our approach to that will essentially be to batten down the hatches and ride it out. We're very fortunate that we will have the ability to do so financially, but certainly don't want to. So it's certainly a challenging and uncertain time remains ahead. I think one of the things that has been really important to be transparent with our team about is, we've already cut $3 million out of our operating budget for 2021 compared to what it would have looked like. More can go if the occupancy is lower. But the answer to, but what if the occupancy is really good? When we can then add those costs back in, can't we? No, we've actually got a huge mountain to climb just to even start. If we get any benefit financially next year, it'll just help to chip away at the loss we've suffered this year. And so actually being really transparent with our staff that we've set our cost base for next year, for example, really low as we can possibly think we can make it. And that alone gives us the best possible chance of, regardless of what happens over the next 12 months, riding it out from a financial sense at least.
Brilliant. And we've got about 5-6 minutes left of this webinar, and it's been absolutely great to talk to everyone. And we've got a question all the way from Qatar, which is about staff. So it's quite fitting that Vince finished on that. And I'll start with Elizabeth and then go to Victoria and finish with myself and Vince, which is, given that COVID is going to be our new normal for a wee while, how are you making sure that you are giving yourselves a break, but also your team a break to be able to recharge to continue delivering these services and potentially be in a position to enact our contingency plan?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think, as leaders and as managers, I think, a huge part of our role is taking care of the people that we lead. And so for that, it's just making sure and checking in with them, not just about what's going on, move-ins, occupancy, but checking in with them as people and how they're feeling. Also, in Europe, the summer holidays are July and August. So we were very clear as a company that we want people to be able to take their summer holidays. We know that traveling in Europe was first let's open all of Europe, and then they start to close things down again. So that made it a little difficult for people. But we were very clear about getting people to take time off so that they can recharge, understanding that August and and September were going to be really busy times. And then I think also it's just about gratitude, right? And making sure that you know that you're telling them how thankful you are for their work, how much you appreciate all the things that they're doing, and making sure that that you're helping them practice gratitude as well. We've been very lucky. We've been able to stay open. We've been able to be a home for students, and we've been able to kind of remain stable as a company. And there are a lot of places that haven't been able to do that. And so really just kind of making sure that we're practicing that gratitude. On a student staff level, it's really also about making sure that we're not forgetting them and that they are still the center of what we do. They're the heart of our halls. And so making sure that we know that they have the right training, that they feel safe, that they also feel taken care of. So, as leaders, we have to have our head on a swivel. And I think that's also true about kind of making sure that we're taking care of our people. I think personally, it's just reconnecting with people and making sure that you're doing the things, getting outside, exercising, kind of the normal stuff. I've started to play a lot more tennis now that you can play tennis again. So that's something that's been able to kind of rejuvenate me. So.
Brilliant. Thank you, Victoria. How are you looking after yourself and your team?
Yeah, I think similarly, it's one thing that's been good for me is thinking about prioritizing my staff and the time that they need. So I have weekly meetings with the warden team, which I didn't do before the pandemic because they were working their normal jobs, but we started doing like half an hour once a week, and then it moved to half an hour twice a week, and for a while it was an hour twice a week, and then we dipped down, and that has built back up as we're getting ready to students to move in. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 2, I have a warden meeting. It's a lot of my time, but actually it's so much worth it. It pays it back fully for our staff to be able to feel like they have the time to get their questions answered. We're all on the same page. They know what's going on. It's worth that time. So I think prioritizing time for them to be able to be heard, to get their questions answered, is really important in that communication aspect. And then in terms of me, I think it's trying to find that balance. One of the things, so I'm back in the office this week because of various meetings that we needed to do and walkthroughs of halls. But actually that's been more helpful for, I think, my work-life balance, because then I leave at some point and I go home, and that physical distance has been helpful. And so I think I need to think about how I make sure to implement that even when I am working from home, which I'll be doing, off and on throughout. But I struggle right now personally with working, taking a break for dinner, and then coming back because my whole setup is right there. And so that's something that I think I need to put a stop to before we get further into the academic year.
Brilliant. Thank you, Victoria. And I totally agree with you on needing the home and work separation. Vince, you have just told us that you are not in the office, and so you don't have that luxury. So how are you looking after yourself and your team?
Jacob, I've been in my study here at home since April, which is coincidentally the same month that my baby boy was born. And so talk about no separation between work and home with a 4-month-old now, and juggling being just downstairs all day. Certainly for me has been challenging. On the flip side, on the personal side, I've been a much more involved father than we ever thought I could be. We thought I'd be off at work, which would have taken me out of the house for sort of 12 hours a day on a normal basis, whereas I'm able to help out at various junctures during the day, and that's been very handy since no one else has been able to come here during various lockdowns to provide much assistance. So pros and cons. But certainly really important for me to get those breaks, to get outside, even just to get some fresh air every day is needed. And just managing a bit of time for self, which I'm lucky my wife is very supportive of me doing, even though I'm also helping out as much as I can with the bub. And then in terms of our team, it's just been tremendously important to be connected, having those regular conversations, ensuring people are taking the breaks, You know, we're making sure people are taking leave, even if they haven't really got anywhere to go, because we know, even if they don't know it, that we know that people actually need a break, and all those sorts of things. So making sure we're continuing with what we'd normally be doing, as well as the extraordinary, to manage people's well-being.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Vince. Well, that brings us to the end of today's webinar or virtual roundtable. Thank you, Victoria, Elizabeth, and Vince, for sharing your pearls of wisdom. I'm sure that there'll be many people out there that have appreciated this, particularly when they go back on YouTube and watch it later. So for those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, I hope you have a wonderful start to your day. And for those of us in the Southern Hemisphere, I hope you'll have a very well-deserved rested evening. Just huge appreciation to everyone out there who's working with our students across the globe, either welcoming them home or preparing to send them off at the end of the academic year. Just a reminder to check out those ACUHO-I October conferences. They're a great virtual opportunity, and ACUHO-I have those new team passes available for purchase, which is awesome. It means that more people than ever can get access to the wonderful PD opportunities. But otherwise, have a wonderful and safe day wherever you may be. Haere and take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.